Hello and welcome to Sci-Fi Night Light, where I talk about random topics that somehow relate to sci-fi and horror. So, when it comes to horror, the exploitation genre tends to always be swimming alongside their larger budgeted fellow films. Exploitation film is defined as being a movie that attempts to succeed financially by exploiting certain trends, niche genres, or lurid content. Quite often these are trashy and sleazy B-films, and the exploitation genre has in turn produced a slew of subgenres, such as Nazi-sploitation, Oz-sploitation, and even nunsploitation. The exploitation subgenre has also produced the topic of today's video, Blaxploitation.
Who's a black private dick that's a sex machine to all the chicks?
Shaft! As the name suggests, these films focus on the exploitation of Black and African American culture, music, and style. While there are plenty of fun and cheesy crime films, we're going to focus solely on Blaxploitation horror.
This is my domain, a kingdom of the dead.
When it comes to Blaxploitation horror, the one film that many people first think of is 1972's Blackula.
Blackula, the Black Avenger.
In this classic Blaxploitation film, an African prince gets bitten by Dracula in the 1700s and is later imprisoned in a coffin.
I curse you with my name. You shall be Blackula.
Hundreds of years later, in 1972, some antiques dealers in Los Angeles accidentally unleash this African vampire on the people of LA. So there is actually a reason for this being so well known, and that's because it's genuinely charming and funny at times. It's just got so much nostalgia and coziness to it. Also, William Marshall does a great job in the lead role and adds a lot of class to the flick.
Make it a Bloody Mary.
Which is filled with funny lines and good times.
You know, he is a strange dude.
So yeah, not much else to say about this. It's cheesy, retro fun, and definitely one of the best in the subgenre.
They mean nothing to me. No one matters but you.
A sequel was released a year later titled Scream Blackula Scream, but it's not as good.
Now he's back. Blackula. Dracula's soul brother.
After starting with Blackula, it's only fitting to move on to Blackenstein, released 1 year after in 1973.
Blackenstein. Black Frankenstein.
Also, I love the fact that they specify that it means the Black Frankenstein, as if it wasn't clear enough. The film follows a Vietnam veteran who gets his arms and legs blown off in combat, only to have a jealous assistant to a mad scientist switch out his DNA and turn him into a brutish killer. Anyway, this film takes itself much more seriously, despite how obviously absurd this is, which admittedly makes it nice and campy, but not really as fun as Blackula. The acting is worse, the sets are alright, and actually consists of some of the props from the original 1931 Frankenstein, but it's mostly pretty forgettable and at times just really boring.
Is this guy ever going to get to the point?
Shut up and get to the point!
Get on with it.
Yes, get on with it!
In 1974, 1 year after the release of The Exorcist, the film Abby was released, originally titled The Blaxorcist, which is honestly a way better title.
That's very nice of you.
The film quite obviously follows a woman who gets possessed by a demon. However, not just any demon, but an African demon of sexuality.
The hair in the shape of a coxcomb, the erect penis. This could be no other deity. This is a shoe. A shoe. What a magnificent find.
Because, well, of course, why not? When you're dipping your toes in exploitation, you might as well go all in. So it's hard to talk about this film without talking about the fact that Warner Brothers sued the filmmakers for plagiarizing The Exorcist, which is pretty understandable.
What kind of fool do you take me for? I know who I am!
I mean, overall I kinda like it. It's got some kind of creepy parts, it's pretty entertaining, and the cast is pretty good, as we once again see William Marshall in another Blaxploitation horror film.
Hear me, demon. Leave this woman's body.
And the rest of the actors all do a pretty okay job as well. So overall, way more cheesy than The Exorcist, but definitely one of the better Blaxploitation horror flicks out there.
Well, you know, I think it'll make a good thesis, and I know you believe all this, Dr. Williams, but, I can't.
And it seems 1974 was a good year for Blaxploitation horror because we also got the lesser known but still pretty fun and funky film Sugar Hill. Not to be confused with a group, the Sugar Hill Gang.
Check it out, I'm the CASN, the OVA, and the rest is FLY. You see, I go by the code of the doctor of the mix, and these reasons I'll tell you why.
As this is much more violence and zombies in it.
Don't kill me! I didn't mean to do it! He told me to! I didn't mean to! No, please! No!
The film follows a beautiful young Diana Hill, nicknamed Sugar, who is engaged to the owner of the hottest club in town. When a local mobster gets rejected, Hill's fiancé is brutally killed, prompting her to resort to voodoo. The mystical Matrix and Baron Samedi conjure up an army of zombies for her revenge.
I know what you can do, the power you possess. How strong is your hate?
Alright, so this is a pretty damn fun film with some cool effects for the time and some passionate acting. Markio Bay is great in the lead role.
I don't believe it.
You're about to become a believer.
And it's definitely one of the better Blaxploitation horror flicks out there. So let's move on to something not so great. The 1976 movie Dr. Black and Mr. Hyde. So as the name makes clear, it's a riff on Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and I'm sure you all know the story in which a scientist experiments with some wacky science stuff and turns into the brutish beast Mr. Hyde, who proceeds to wreak havoc in the city.
When the boys go rushing, Mr. Hyde starts crushing. The crowd is hushing as the blood comes gushing.
This is very cheesy, but overall it's very silly, but still fun enough to watch.
That's a cross between the abominable snowman and Willie the werewolf.
We're gonna finish off with one of the most ridiculous titles on here, 1972's The Thing with Two Heads. In this cult film, a rich, racist man is dying and decides to go ahead with the only reasonable alternative, to transplant his head onto the body of another man, because that makes total sense. As his health deteriorates rapidly, the doctors are forced to act quickly and attach the rich man's head to the body of a black man on death row.
What are you guys doing to me?
Shut up.
Where's the rest of you?
We are joined together temporarily.
Yep, you heard that right. This film has it all, an extremely outlandish premise, bad dialogue, some of the worst chase scenes of that era, and some genuinely great laughs, both intentional and not so much.
You get some sleep, baby.
Why don't you stay here for a little while?
It's no use, honey. Maybe when I get used to it.
Now you know you got to go.
Of course, there is an underlying message of empathy and understanding, which is all well and good, but the film itself is just hilariously silly. So that about does it for this episode of Sci-Fi Night Light. We hope you enjoyed it. I'm your host, Sebastian Mendel Martinez, and I'll catch you guys next time.